In today's video, we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors focusing on the Edmonton Oilers and the Montreal Canadiens. Plus, we also have some other news on the Toronto Maple Leafs, Alexander Ovechkin, and former GM of the Panthers, Dale Tallon. We'll jump into all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As you can see, we're doing another outdoor video here in beautiful downtown Fredericton, New Brunswick. Of course, behind me across the St. John River, you can see many of the nice buildings in the downtown area here. So I hope you enjoy the scenery for today's video, and I hope the wind stays calm here and doesn't bother us too much as we try to record this video. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover today. Let's kick things off with the news that came out on Dale Tallon, former GM of the Florida Panthers, previously the Chicago Blackhawks. There are reports that the NHL is investigating a potential racial slur that apparently he is being accused of during his time in the Toronto bubble during the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs here. Of course, at this point, we don't really have a whole lot of information. We don't know what was said. We don't know who was said towards or anything of that nature, but apparently the NHL is investigating, so we'll see if anything further comes from that. Of course, currently right now, he's not employed by an NHL franchise, so I'm not sure they'd really be able to punish him in any way, but it could impact future employment opportunities. I guess we'll see what happens once we know more information. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have some news on Alexander Ovechkin of the Washington Capitals. Of course, as we know, he is getting into the final year of his contract with the Caps here in the 2020-2021 NHL season, and we do have reports that the GM Brian McClellan has released a statement indicating that Ovechkin decided he wanted to wait before getting into contract extension talks. Both sides were in agreement that they would wait until training camp when the following season gets underway before they would really, continue those discussions. And obviously, both sides are in agreement on that. So obviously, the Caps are a team that we fully expect to go through a bit of a transition this offseason, especially with goaltender Braden Holtby likely departing. Of course, they have guys like Ovechkin and Backstrom not getting any younger. Many feel Ovechkin is likely going to want to continue playing to possibly chase another Stanley Cup or chase Wayne Gretzky's goal record. So we'll see what happens. But right now, there's certainly no rush by either side to get a deal done. And we likely won't hear any more about that until we get further into the fall and the training camps get underway, which is currently slated for around mid-November if everything here goes well. Now, a quick tidbit here on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course, we saw them recently complete a pretty significant trade with the Pittsburgh Penguins. One of the pieces they acquired is forward Evan Rodriguez. Rodriguez is a pending RFA, making $2 million. Now, it's fully expected that the Leafs won't offer him a qualifying offer, which essentially is going to make him a UFA, but they are still interested in retaining his services. Essentially, they just don't want to pay $2 million for him to be on their roster, but they would consider signing him and maybe even getting him a little extra term if it means getting a cheaper deal done. So maybe something around the $1 million mark might be a little bit more likely for them to consider. I don't know the exact terms that they'd be willing to pay, obviously, but likely going to happen here that Rodriguez is not tendered a qualifying offer and becomes a UFA. So there is a chance he could leave Toronto and never play for them, but it's believed Dubas will make an offer for him at a cheaper contract, maybe offer him an extra year or something to that effect, to see if he can still be a piece for their bottom six moving forward for at least the next year or two. Of course, the Leafs are a team we expect to be extremely busy with several other trades and other rumors that have been swirling around them here since they made the Kapanen deal. So we'll see. I mean, it very well could have a very different looking team when we get to next season. Now, as I mentioned, today's trade rumors I want to take a look at involve the Habs and the Oilers. Let's get started with the Edmonton Oilers. Now, the information I want to take a look at comes from the Edmonton Journal, and the Edmonton Journal was referencing NHL insider Brian Lawton, talking about the fact that he has information that says that the Oilers are not only considering moving a defenseman, but they could consider moving two defensemen in their top four. Now, if you look at their top four, we have Nurse, Bear, Klefbom, and Larson. And Nurse and Bear, considering their youth and how well they've played, likely are not going anywheres. I had mentioned before the possibility of Larson being a trade chip to help bring in another forward or a goaltender, and that very well still could be the case. But he does believe as well that Klefbom is less likely, but if the right deal is there, that they would consider making that trade. They could move Klefbom if they get a right deal for a top six winger or an upgrade in goal. It's more than likely Mike Smith doesn't return. I know they have that Koskinen contract, but clearly goaltending was an area of concern for the Oilers in the playoffs, so it's going to be interesting to see how they address that this offseason. Now, of course, I wouldn't be completely shocked, I've talked about this before, if they did move a defenseman, but I'm not sure I'd move two top four in the form of Larson and Klefbom. I mean, I would personally try to move on from Chris Russell before I would move Oscar Klefbom. he's still young enough and offensive enough that he can still be a big role. But I understand they have some younger defensemen coming up through the ranks that are going to be looking for bigger roles, like Evan Bouchard, as well as a Philip Broberg. Obviously, they got Caleb Jones, who they'd like to get a full-time spot for too. So, I mean, those three guys are going to be likely to be, fairly substantial parts of the top six Oilers blue line. Of course, you throw in Nurse and Bear, doesn't leave a ton of room. So I kind of understand where they're coming from. But I would probably be a little reluctant to move Klefbom just yet. I would probably more likely steer towards Larson as well as Russell, but I guess you have to see what's out there. And it also depends on what the return is. Like this article suggests, it's not like they're going out hardcore shopping Klefbom, but it believes that they would consider moving him for the right price. And of course, in the case of Chris Russell, he very well could become a buyout candidate. I do believe that they will entertain moving him if they can, but if they cannot find a trade, a buyout is certainly a possibility now that he's entering the final year of the contract. But I expect the Oilers blue line possibly look a fair bit different next year. I know they'd really, like I said, they'd find like another winger. This article also goes on to talk about if they can't find a high-end winger via trade, that they could explore maybe signing a guy like Mike Hoffman through free agency. Of course, he's been very productive between his time in Ottawa and Florida, and likely is not going to be signing in Florida since it's believed they want to cut costs. I mean, it is possible that they could cut costs in other ways and sign him, but many believe he's likely on the move. So if Hoffman does become available, he could certainly be an entertaining piece for the Oilers. He could fit well with either Leon or McDavid. So debatable how they go about that. Of course, they still have the James Neal contract on the books. That's likely not going anywhere. Neal did have a better season last year, so hard to say what kind of role they put him in. Of course, Yamamoto fit well with Draisaitl. I mean, you get Nugent Hopkins. He's going to need another contract in the year as well. And obviously, his next deal could complicate things too if they want to keep him in the fold longer term, which at this point I'm sure they'd be interested in. So they have to be careful what they sign for contracts. They don't have a ton of space. If they did move out both Klefbom and Larson, that's over $8 million. But then your blue line's less experienced, a weaker. So debatable what they do, but I do expect the Oilers to be somewhat active trying to address some issues here that they certainly ran into here in these 2020 NHL playoffs. Now, as I mentioned, I want to talk about the Montreal Canadiens as well. We have two articles we're referencing today, one from The Athletic from Arpel and Basu, one from the Montreal Gazette, both talking about Max Domi and Philip Danault. The Athletic article talks about Domi and how the fact that Montreal really shouldn't feel pressure to trade him, that he could still be a valuable offensive weapon for the Habs moving forward. But as we've discussed before, I'm not so sure that's the case based on how they address their top six during these playoffs. Basu believes that Domi could still be a valuable offensive force for the Habs moving forward. He also believes that's another reason why other teams will have interest. Of course, he is a pending restricted free agent as well. Even though Basu believes that he's not necessarily going to be traded, he does discuss some potential mock trades. So I wanted to see what everybody thought of those potential deals that he's referencing here in the article. One trade was with the Detroit Red Wings for other restricted free agent forward Anthony Mantha. That could be a potential one-for-one swap right there. I mean, Mantha brings the size and goal-scoring ability to the Montreal forward group that they're missing right now. So obviously, Domi's a smaller forward, but been very productive, but they do need some size. Mantha's a 30-goal guy. That could certainly be a possibility. So that's one trade option he goes over. He also suggests maybe talking to Columbus about Josh Anderson and maybe a bit of a package deal. There likely will be other pieces involved in that scenario. And he also talks about the fact of maybe taking Max Domi and packaging up with the first-round pick this year and going after a real high-end impact forward. So I'd certainly love to know what your thoughts are in there. He didn't reference any particular players he thought they should target, but clearly they have a really deep prospect pool, and their pick in the first round is not too late that they could still get a pretty valuable player, so it could have a fair bit of trade value if they wanted to maybe add more of an impact player now instead of adding another piece to their already very deep prospect pool. Do you think that's an option the Montreal Canadiens and Marc Bergevin should consider? And if so, what kind of impact player do you think they should be targeting? Now, of course, as I mentioned, the other trade talk here in this article talks about maybe going for a left shot D like Jonas Brodin in Minnesota. Many feel that the left side of the defense needs to be upgraded, although I would argue that based on how they played in these playoffs, there's less of an argument now than there was before. Clearly, guys like Brett Kulak certainly improved his play. So between Kulak and Sherratt, Romanov, you still got Victor Mente in there. I mean, it is debatable. I mean, Brodin's a really good D. It certainly would be an upgrade, but is it worth moving out a guy like Domi to make that kind of deal happen? So let me know what your thoughts are. What's kind of those options do you think Montreal would be best suited for by trading Max Domi? And if not, do you think they should actually hang on to him, sign him, and find a way to work this out and keep him in the fold here? Because clearly there's a lot of people feel Domi will be traded this offseason. Now, the other Habs news we want to talk about today comes from the Montreal Gazette, as I mentioned. The Gazette had an interview with center iceman Philip Danault, who, of course, has become a really solid two-way center. He certainly had some love for the Selke Trophy this year, but not enough to be a finalist. Danault kind of seemed a bit unhappy that he was really not getting as much as a top six role as he has the past couple of years. With the emergence of guys like Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Nick Suzuki, he's playing more of a defensive role, and he seemed to be unhappy with that, feeling that he's proven himself and that he can be a very, a solid offensive player who can contribute. So he didn't really know what his future held with the team. He's got one more year left on his contract, just over $3 million. So based on how he's playing right now, it's a pretty good contract, a pretty good bargain for Montreal, especially considering just how solid he's been on both ends of the ice. So, arguably getting himself closer to being in that Selke Trophy conversation. Having these two other centers come up and really prove themselves along with Danault is kind of what a lot of this talk around Mickey Max Domi expendable has become, because Domi had been playing center and now he'd have to be a winger, which is going to change his value a little bit. And many felt that he wasn't getting the opportunity on the wing, and that it didn't make sense to keep him as a bottom six wing. So clearly in that scenario, do you not think that Philip Danault sticking around could have an impact on their plans for Max Domi as well? But obviously, if he sees himself as being a top two center longer term, then that could impact his future with the team. I mean, I really like Philip Danault as a player. I think he's really developed nicely as a great player for Montreal, and he's had to play up higher in the lineup than he probably should have because of their lack of depth at that position. But now that they're getting that depth and these younger players have proven themselves, it's only natural for a player like him to kind of slide down a little bit, in my opinion at least, and play more of the role that he's kind of better suited for. Career high of 13 goals, around 50 points. So, I mean, really, to me, that's a really solid number two and a really, really good number three. I mean, maybe he doesn't see himself being a third-line center, and I kind of don't blame him based on where he's played the last few years, but I would hope that he could realize that a lot of that had to do more so with the team's depth than anything else. So clearly, Danault is a great player for them. It would really be a shame if they lost him through free agency next year. But, it depends on how he sees himself. And based on this article, seems like he may not be thrilled with playing a lesser role and being more known as a defensive specialist. So let me know your thoughts on the future of Philip Danault in Montreal. Do you think they can kind of work things out, that he still plays a bigger role, or that he can, sign a contract extension with the club? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments so we can discuss further. Now, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.